Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever Awesemo.com Roundtable. I think that's what we're calling it. We didn't give it a cool name yet. We'll work on that. I'm Chris Spags, joined today by the baseball savant himself, Jake Hari, Chubster Josh Engelman, and our boss, the man behind it all, the DFS genius who gets the best intro as well, Mr. Alex Baker, better known as Awesemo. How are you guys all doing?
Good.
Never better.
Yeah, I guess that wasn't really a great prompt for you guys to answer, but everybody's doing well. That's what matters. We're trying to do this because we basically feel like we have all these different pockets of the Awesemo.com website / empire that Alex and his team have built with us as the brave little pawns going ahead. And I think we wanted to have something where we're all, together and talking about things, but we also want to have a chance to kind of introduce Alex more to you guys, spend some time with him, learn more about his background, which we delved a little bit into on the live stream. And we're going to circle back because I want to talk more about Alex's storied past in the world of music. But Alex, let's kind of get into your background more. They know enough about Josh, Jake, and I. Where did this all start for you? Where are you from? I guess let's go to the basics. Where are you from?
I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I got into DFS like a few years back because of my poker background. Basically, people were talking on the poker forums about like the new big thing being daily fantasy. And this one dude who was making more money than me was like, I'm retiring from poker to play fantasy sports. I'm like, well, if he's retiring and he's making more than me, then what am I doing here? So I gave it a try. I kind of worked my way up. As I started having some success, I started shifting more away from poker and more to fantasy sports. And it just worked out, and here we are.
Was poker your first real job, or was there another job before that where you were like, oh, I can actually do something that's more of a side hustle and make it my main hustle?
So I had played poker as kind of a part-time job in college, but after college, I actually worked for a nonprofit for 2 years. It was an environmental group, and we went door-to-door fundraising. One of the campaigns, we were just like trying to increase the amount of clean energy in Michigan by passing legislation. And the crazy thing about this job, it's like a sales job kind of because you have to reach quotas, and most of the people didn't succeed. And after a year, I ended up getting fired as well. I got a second chance, and it didn't work out. It worked out about the same the second time. So I guess I realized I was a lot better at poker and fantasy sports than fundraising.
Are you like a green guy? Was it a passion project for you, or was it kind of this is just a job I'm doing out of college?
Yeah, it was a combination because some of my friends were doing it, and I just tried it, and it was fun. The culture was really cool. We went and partied every Thursday night and a lot of other nights. So I met a lot of cool people. That part was a lot different than being a poker pro or a fantasy pro, where you're just kind of like chilling by yourself most of the time. But I can live with the change in the career there.
Did you get into the poker stuff out of necessity when you left the job, or was it kind of like, oh, I could either keep down this path and do the nonprofit, knocking on doors and trying to drum up interest, or was it like a thing where you're like, you know what, this sucks, I don't like it that much, like I just want to do this other thing?
Well, it wasn't really a choice because I got fired. But my brother had a business he was starting, and he gave me a job, but it was like an hour away, so I did it for a week, and I was like, well, he's not offering more than I can make playing poker, so I just decided to give that a try, and I had success doing that. Eventually, it became illegal in the U.S., so I had to go to Canada to do it, so I was kind of commuting between Michigan and Windsor, Ontario, which is another good thing about DFS, is you can just kind of do it in the comfort of your own house.
So how often were you commuting back and forth?
I was going there like 4 or 5 days a week. Basically, like the border patrol were like, you can't live here. You can only spend like at most 50% of your time in Canada. So I like wrote out my whole schedule. Like about like 50% of the hours were in Michigan, 50% were in Canada, and
wow. Okay.
That was
So
kind
it's a
of
commitment
my last
to the art form.
poker for one of their. Sorry, did I cut out there?
Yeah, a little bit. Sorry, I didn't hear you, but go ahead.
My last year playing poker, I went for Supernova Elite on Poker Stars, which I had to play like 2 million hands in the course of a year, average a little bit more than 1,000 an hour. So it was quite an undertaking.
Josh and Jake, have you guys ever played poker? Are you familiar at all with that world?
I'm not. I was too young for the poker craze. But I think Josh has, right?
Yeah, I was in the poker craze. Wasn't quite driving to Canada daily to play. That wasn't sort of my level. But that was like right in my wheelhouse of college. So we were playing constantly. It was poker and Halo 3 were like the only two things I did in college. Studying being third.
The irony is you probably could have made a career out of both of those things if you hadn't had foresight.
Yeah, the problem was I was trying to make a career out of drinking.
That's a tough one.
We can't all be Tucker Max, I guess.
Yeah.
Alex, what similarities do you see between poker and daily fantasy sports? Because there's obviously a lot of, I guess, discipline, some sort of higher level data that you have to bake into everything you do. I mean, poker, you're doing it a lot more on the fly instead of over the course of 8 hours building lineups and kind of reviewing things. But are there similarities between the two? And I guess what are the main ones that you feel like maybe made you more successful in the beginning?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was an easy transition. I felt like I built up a lot of skills for DFS playing poker. I kind of break it into two categories. One is kind of like the lifestyle, where it's like you have all this like negative and positive feedback, and it's like all kind of luck based, some skill based, but in the short term, you're going to lose or win just regardless of how good you are. So kind of like dealing with that and learning how to like manage that lifestyle was important. And then there's also the aspect that they're both like strategy games. So like, although like when one, it's like cards and statistics based, and the other you're picking teams of fantasy players, both you're trying to outsmart your competition. And that's kind of the essence of the game.
Were you always a big sports fan, or I guess was DFS more of an extension of the poker thing?
I've always been interested in athletics, but I was never a huge sports fan growing up just because my family wasn't into it. But in 2004, when the Pistons won the championship, I started getting pretty into basketball. So ever since then, I've been trying to keep up with the Pistons and just the league in general.
The ugliest championship win of all time. That's what that was. That was ironically the first year I had HD TV was that series. Not a great one to invest in for that.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, if you don't like an 80-76 game of basketball, you don't like the game.
That's true. I grew up in New York during the Knicks era where they were just beating up everybody and driving point totals down. That was the only reason they were competitive with the Bulls was they would just slaughter like Jordan every time he would come in and Pippen. So there's value to that. You need goons. You always need goons.
We definitely need those in daily fantasy too, kind of to intimidate the competition. That's an area that we haven't developed as much yet.
That's why we have Josh. That's the Chubster name. You earned that through years of goonery. Actually, how about you guys? You guys, Josh, I know you're a big sports fan, but let's talk more about your guys' background too while we're talking about Alex's. What were your favorite sports growing up? I guess what made you guys get into DFS?
I mean, I was always playing, season-long fantasy forever, basically, since I can remember. I was more of a baseball guy growing up. I played that most in high school. But I played basketball, baseball, soccer, golf. Like, I kind of did everything that I could do. Then transitioned to season-long, and then as soon as daily fantasy, like draft street type time, I was like, this is way better than season long. Like, I just got tired of injuries and all of like the perils of season long, the boredom if it's not going well. And then it was like, daily fantasy's here. This is significantly better. Let's just do this. So I don't play season long at all any longer. It's only daily for me.
How about you, Jake?
Yeah, so I just grew up kind of like Josh, just playing everything, like watching baseball, watching basketball, and then I kind of got into just basketball. And I was always like, since like 6th grade, I've been playing fantasy and studying it and doing season long. And then I heard about like, kind of like as the like DraftKings and FanDuel were starting to boom is when I got in and started playing some NFL and thought I was good. I won my first couple times, and then Like most people, I thought I was invincible and lost it all. So a couple of deposits later, I started trying some other sports, started trying hockey. That went okay, started getting more into it. And so I never played hockey or even really liked it growing up. But so that's like the main sport that I like watching now, and MLB. But I'm still a big NFL fan.
I think, yeah, for me, it's the same thing, too, where I started, I think, in 6th or 7th grade. Actually, no, maybe a little later. Might have been 9th grade, actually. I remember my first baseball league was on a site called Sandbox Sports, and it was like a salary cap thing, too. And I never played another salary cap league until then. I started playing DFS as an adult, like years and years later. But I feel like if you have that kind of fantasy background, it's sort of a different pivot to go from season-long to daily. Alex, were you ever a season-long player, or did you just only do the daily part?
Yeah, I definitely did season long. I remember doing some basketball leagues, and back then I wasn't as cool. I think last year I did a league where you say your lineup for the week, but back then you had to like go in every day and change who's on the bench and who's playing that day. So it was basically whoever like tried the hardest would win, like for sure. So I won.
Josh, you mentioned the Draft Street stuff. I'm actually curious about that because I worked in internet content stuff when the Draft Street money started going around, and they were kind of like people, I guess, were building their bankrolls. Like the people who are top players now were building then. I guess what was that world like in Alex too? If you were involved in that time, I guess what was the difference between then and now? I think Josh, you've talked about it a few times on your videos, but I guess like what are the main differences between early DFS and the way that we play now?
It's night and day. I mean, it's honestly like two different sports compared to like 5 years ago. There was no like CSV edits. There were no optimizers. Like there was no information really. Rake was significantly lower, which is obviously not as fun now. People were dumber. I don't know how else to say it, but like people are way smarter now, and it's an information thing. Like everything exists. It's put people on a very different footing. But yeah, like 5 years ago, it was the Wild West.
Alex, were you involved in those Draft Street / other precursors before the DraftKings and FanDuel kind of became the two games in town? And Playline, of course, obviously they're the third game in town and fantastic. You should go there.
Good luck.
But also, I guess, were you playing in those days too, or were you only a DraftKings FanDuel guy?
Yeah, my first site was Draft Day. The guys from Card Runners who I made videos for like started it, so I kind of heard about it as it was first starting. And I was like, man, how can anyone beat the rake at 10%? You know, like that's ridiculous. It's like twice as high as poker, right? But I guess I missed out on my opportunity there. But I did. I came in like second place in their perfect lineup contest one time, and I won like $50, which then I quickly lost playing basketball because I didn't know all the injury stuff. Like I had Rondo in my pick'em, but he didn't play the second day of back-to-backs. So I realized it takes a lot of effort to kind of keep up and be competitive.
I think Draft Day had points for missed or like negative points for missed shots, right? Am I remembering that correctly? That was always really weird. Like guys like Jamal Crawford and stuff could bury you if they went like 4 for 17.
J.R. Smith.
Yeah, J.R. Smith's entire career would be a waste on Draft Day, I presume.
I'm almost positive that was Draft Day.
I had a question, but it just went away. Alex, have you listened to that interview that Adam Levitan did with Kanye? Because I kind of want to ask you about some stuff that he mentioned there. If you're not familiar, like Adam Levitan did like this long form interview with Kanye, who's, if you guys aren't familiar, one of the top players or has been historically one of the top players, and he kind of discussed at more length. Like his story was pretty crazy. Like he went into crazy credit card debt to kind of get where he got. But also he talked about one particular competition he had with, I think it was Sahil Sood. Excuse me, I got the name wrong. And how basically he lost like hundreds of thousands of dollars because Sahil kept going at him hard and like was attacking him and all that. So I guess two questions, like, do you have a rival like that? Is there somebody who like headhunts you, or have you had that kind of, I want to say toxic, but that sort of competitive relationship with anybody else in the DFS space?
First of all, that was a great interview. So if you haven't listened to it, definitely recommend it. It's always interesting kind of seeing behind the veil of these guys who's just like a screen name online. Because for the most part, like there's not much info out there about them. Guys like Yoda Cow and Chipotle Addict now, like Kanye and Sahil Sood before. And when I started, I was kind of like trying to be the next Sahel Sid, I guess, because he was on the top every night. But to get to your question, I do post like head-to-heads, and a lot of regulars take them, and I'm just like puzzled why, because overall, look at the results, and neither of us will be winning money in the long run. Or maybe they'll be thinking they are, but I have a database against pros that goes back, and overall, we're kind of just losing to the rake. I realize in poker, it's important to know like that there has to be people losing money for you to win money. So it's much easier to play in contests with recreational players than to try to take on the pros. So that's never really been a focus of mine.
In terms of your nightly output, how much are you putting towards head-to-heads? I mean, it's sort of general terms, but how much are you putting towards, I guess, with the head-to-heads you do versus the tournament stuff that you do?
Head-to-heads, I do play. It's like a pretty small part of my volume. It's a bigger proportionally on like the small slates, but I'll probably play like maybe 20% of my overall volume in head-to-heads, maybe less. But I don't really like think about it too much. I guess it's like I would play a lot more, but the sites make it kind of hard to like put out a lot of volume, because if you don't cancel your match before it starts and you're unpaired, you're just gonna be paired against a pro, and that's basically like you're both losing money, you know.
How does your approach change for like the lineups you make for a head-to-head versus the GPPs like you do?
In a head-to-head, I just try to put out my lineup that has the highest projection according to my projections. In GPPs, you know, there's a lot more factors like ownership, like how much diversity you want to have between your lineups and stuff like that.
To circle back on the Kanye thing real fast, he mentioned sort of the stress that he felt, and I guess occasionally he'd felt, it seemed like when he was expressing it, I don't think he said it outright, but it seemed like it was veering towards depression at times. He actually might have outright said it. I don't want to misquote him though. Do you feel that sort of anxiety every night that you're doing this? I mean, you're wagering more money than most of us are playing or winning. I mean, over the course of a year, most nights. I guess, how does that affect you? How does the psychology for you kind of come down to it when, you know, you're investing significant portions every single day on a game which is still, you know, a heavy degree of chance and variance?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit different than Kanye in that respect, I guess, because it sounded like he just went all out, like regardless of his financial situation. But I like try to keep it way more managed, so that I'm not like risking more than I can afford to lose on a given night. And I think I've learned over the course of my career doing gaming to kind of like keep an even keel and not get too excited about wins or too bummed out about losses. So that's important if you want to kind of make a career out of it.
Let's see. So I guess do you think that's a key to your success overall relative to some of the guys? I mean, we've talked about Sahil Sudin. I don't know his story that well, other than it seems like he was a guy who was sort of like the Awesemo of his day, and now sort of not in existence anymore, at least from my limited research and knowledge. So I guess, like, I mean, both. What happens with a player, I guess, where these guys have a sort of limited life cycle and maybe they kind of fade back? And also, like, why do you feel like you have staying power versus some of these other guys?
It's hard because I don't really know each of these guys that well, but I think that I'm a lot more honest about my abilities than some other guys. So like, so I try to fight battles I know I can win. I know with Sahel, he was playing like high stakes hockey and NASCAR and all this stuff, which really wasn't his forte. I don't really know how that ended up financially for him, but I try to really focus on games that I have a proven track record in, and I don't kind of wager too much if I don't know for certain that I'm going to be a winner in the long run.
Interesting. All right, so I think that's sort of the establishing stuff I wanted to get up front. Jake and Josh, I'll open the floor to you guys, so I'm not just dominating all the questions, but I feel like now we know enough Alex as a human being. We got the psychological profile. So now let's get into some of the nitty-gritty questions. I feel like Jake in particular probably has ones, because Jake doesn't get enough Alex time. He's like a neglected child, where now he's finally getting to see his dad, and he gets the big hug. He gets to ask all things we want to know. So Jake, hit him.
Oh yeah, I got a handful here, but we can go back and forth.
Should I play Cat's Cradle in the background right now or something?
So now, or when kind of you were figuring out DFS, or like just getting into it, who did you study, or like how did you study like the top players, or like find out who they were, and sort of take aspects of their game, or was this all just you doing projections and coming up with your own stuff?
So I think most guys, when they start off, they're kind of trying to emulate people who they think are the best.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the best was Salah Sid. I didn't really keep track of results, so I don't really know if he was or not, but he was the guy putting out the most volume on every night. So I was kind of trying to keep tabs on him and see what he was doing. But more, I did focus on like my own projections and trying to make those as accurate as possible, because I felt like that would be a big source of edge if I could do it better than everyone else.
Yeah, what are some mistakes that you made when you started DFS that are common that you might see people making now? Maybe not as much now, but like a few years ago when people were getting into DFS, and how did you fix them?
That one is a tough one to answer because I don't want to tell everybody what they're doing wrong because that's benefiting me, right?
Right.
You could just tell us, and I'll cut this part of the
One
video.
glaring mistake. One glaring mistake. That's pretty obvious.
I think just kind of like maybe one thing I hadn't done when I started off is kind of going back and analyzing like past tournaments. Like one feature I like now is lineup rewind on Fantasy Cruncher, because you can kind of like try out different strategies on a past slate and see kind of what would have worked and what wouldn't have, and that can be a source of getting some extra data, which you might not normally have gotten just playing the games.
Is there something that you used to do as part of your process that you stopped doing, that you were just like, this is a waste of time, or this is a waste of effort? I know you in particular key in on a certain key stats for different sports, because I assume the other ones are extraneous for the stuff that you would look at. But I guess like overall, is there anything that's part of your process where you're like, you know what, I don't need to do this anymore, I can just do this instead?
I've definitely been changing up my process, but if anything, it's kind of like getting more and more like elaborate, going from simple to kind of like way complicated. So yeah, the more you do generally, more effort you put in, like the better you're gonna do if you like are able to kind of work smart. So that's what I try to do.
Yeah, kind of going along with that. Chris, do you have something?
No, go ahead, Jay.
Oh, yeah, just kind of going along with that. I think one thing that a lot of like beginners struggle with is coming up with their own projections. So at what point in your DFS career were you making projections, and then how often are you still tweaking them?
So projections are kind of an interesting topic because nobody really knows what everyone else is doing. But I've talked to a lot of guys at these events, and I think a lot of guys are using like public projection sources or like the subscription sources, and then kind of like adding their own twists to them. That's something like I want people to do with our site, is kind of look at our rankings and kind of use that plus their own intuition to kind of get where they needed to go. Especially for people who aren't pros, like making your own projection system is a full-time job, and it may involve a level of expertise that people might not have initially, and access to data sets which aren't very easy to get. But I think you can be successful using the projection sources that are out there, and especially on our site, these are numbers coming directly from my own projections. I'm not giving everyone exact numbers because that is important to my edge. I would have to charge way too much to justify that. But I think the info we are putting out there is pretty valuable. And then if you apply the strategies that we talk about on the site and use the ownership projections and such, that's enough to be successsul.
I have a question. So and I guess this is one I think a lot of people would actually be curious about. Like, what does your day look like? Can you walk us through sort of when you wake up to your, so let's say lineup lock. Like, what are you doing throughout the day to get ready? I mean, how many times are you revisiting things? How many times are you sort of tinkering? Like, what does that look like for you?
Man, my day has gotten a lot more complicated since like starting this website because I'm responsible for a lot more. So I'll just talk about like before I did that, which it's very based on sports, but like with the sport like baseball, you don't really need. Well, I just kind of relied on my model to like fill in the details. So I just kind of waited until like 2 hours before lock or something, start updating lineups, running crunches, looking at information online, listening to some streams. But now I'm responsible for a lot more, like writing articles, updating rankings throughout the day. So it takes a lot more time. This for like NBA, I kind of look at the box scores from the previous games, and in the morning, and then like in the evening, I start updating it when player injury information came out. So, yeah, pretty busy hours before lock.
Are you guys getting his audio?
Yeah, no, I'm not.
Not really.
Okay, Alex, you're cutting out a little bit there.
My bad.
Oh, there we go.
Yep, you're holding out.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think we got the gist of that though. So okay, so you don't look at lineups then in the beginning of the day, like you basically don't touch it. You don't kind of get a feel for them. I guess the moment you wake up, you just leave it alone. You just work on the data part of it first.
Yeah, I mean, specifically with baseball, kind of running the algorithms in the morning, kind of putting out some rankings, and then throughout the day, kind of looking at the numbers and seeing like, is there anything I need to tweak, stuff like that. But with baseball, I'm not like putting too much of an intuitive touch on it because there's so much data available. With other sports like basketball or football, you need to spend more time, or I need to spend more time like researching context, kind of to see where different players like fit on the team, because that's important to like actually coming up with a projection. Whereas baseball is like you kind of know how much everyone's going to play based on their spot in the order, so it saves a lot of time researching that element.
What's your favorite sport to play?
Well, right now WNBA, but it's just because it's the new one. I like them all. Probably football is the most exciting because there's just the most to play for. I like the strategy of baseball though, because I feel like more than other sports, it's not as much about like overall projection. It's more about the strategy of how you build your lineups. So I think that that's engaging to me on a different level than a sport like basketball, where it's more about just picking the best plays on based on value.
So, football. So we talked about baseball, and I've talked about it on the live streams. The stats that you gave us in the beginning, and when we started the baseball season, you kind of gave us like a little Word document, a 2-page thing, saying the things that you look at, the things that are important, and basically stripping out a lot of the nonsense, which I think it's easy to find with every sport, really. Like I like advanced analytics for basketball, but they don't often tell the picture you need for fantasy. With the baseball stuff, it was pretty straightforward, though. Is there something with football that people are missing? Like, what are you looking at for football as being the most relevant data points for how you build projections and your lineups?
Well, I really don't know what other people are doing. I think everyone kind of keeps that information secret, but I think the core of a good model would be kind of looking at how many yards per play or per each type of play like a team is getting, and then kind of using that plus the number of plays kind of come up with yardage and touchdowns and stuff like that.
So are you looking at red zone stuff, or is that sort of noise to you?
I think red zone stuff is important because like there's trends like bigger players are going to get more targets in the red zone. So that definitely is a factor that's worth accounting for when you're building your model.
Interesting. I just want to get a little bit of football. We're going to delve more in depth into football once we get closer to that season, but I feel like football is one that I personally, and I feel like we've all maybe had some degree of success with it, but I've always felt like I'm just kind of grasping at straws and using different data, which isn't necessarily the most helpful. Like I use like, the DVOA stuff and kind of go work backwards from there, like what defense is worth attacking. But that's not even necessarily how it works out, because there's also pace of play and all these things. But Just something to look forward to because I want to get into your head more on that, but we won't do it yet. We won't crack you open and eat the sweet innards of your football knowledge yet.
Well, you guys will have access to the rankings we're going to put out on the site, so that will be a big insight into what I'm thinking.
There you go. What's your least favorite sport to play? Like, which one do you find the hardest and you haven't maybe been able to wrap your head around, or is there one?
One of the hardest, definitely, to me is NASCAR, because there's so few stats and so few players that it's hard to come up with a comprehensive strategy to kind of win it. At least for me, not knowing much about it. I still enjoy that one. I enjoy all the ones I play. So can't really say I have the least favorite. Maybe hockey, just because.
Sorry.
There's a lot I don't know compared to other sports.
Can I circle back to something quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
You were talking about lineup rewind on Cruncher. I assume you're probably not going back daily any longer to reevaluate how your day went. But how often were you doing that? Let's say before you were steady in your model. How often were you going back and looking at the previous slate, looking at your, looking at how it would have done if you went to, I don't know, a 5-3 stack instead of a 4-4 or stuff like that?
Probably not enough, but I think it is a good way to kind of evaluate how your projections are doing overall. Because you can't really tell on a daily basis, but if you combine the results from a bunch of days, that'll start to build a picture that you can kind of use to improve your system.
Yeah, we get a lot of questions just in general of what can I do to get better stuff? And most of it is usually thinking about how to get better for that next slate and not necessarily going back and reevaluating. So I'm always looking for things to tell people on how to go back and sort of learn from whatever you have done on the previous days, because that's information, especially with the lineup rewind now, where you can input everything that you have and know exactly what you needed to hit. You can go look at the previous, you can find all the cut line information. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts to that as to how to, I don't know, point people in the right direction of being retroactive in their info.
Yeah, I think it's easier to do in some sports like football where it's once a week, but it's useful to try to test out different strategies like what settings you would have to use, get the players in your lineups, how you had projected the winning lineups to be, would those have been ones that would have been worth entering or not. So it's kind of there's a variety of kind of ways you can analyze the info.
Back to you, Chris.
Jake, back to you. Do you have anything? I feel like Jake's got some things that he's ruminating on over there. I can see in his eyes.
Well, just thinking about something Josh said. You mentioned you kind of alluded to sample size. So I know it's sort of sport dependent, but what kind of sample size would someone have to take? How many weeks or months or maybe even years of playing a certain sport where they can look at their ROI and deem themselves either a profitable player or not a profitable player?
That's a really good question, because I think it's important to kind of be introspective and see your skill level compared to the field. It is really hard to do because even over the course of a season, there's a ton of variance, especially there's so many top-heavy tournaments, whether you win first 5 times versus 10 times, both are realistic outcomes, but for any player, but the overall money is hugely different. One, this is actually a project of mine that I want to do, is kind of have a bankroll or a kind of something like Roto Tracker, except it kind of gives you a adjusted ROI based on your percentile finishes instead of what you actually want, kind of even out some of the luck aspects. So that's something I want to get on the site eventually. I think it's probably more useful seeing your distribution of finishes instead of the actual dollars one, probably.
Did you have like an aha moment where you realized that you were good at this? Because you kind of mentioned in passing like maybe some people just aren't able to do it, or I mean I think most people can do it if you kind of dedicate the time, and I feel like you've said the same. But if you are failing, I guess sometimes you could feel like that moment may never come. But did you have a moment where you were like, I'm good at this, like I can actually make this work?
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like when I started making more money doing it than I was making at poker. That it's like, well, that was easy because I didn't even have a job, so I could just switch immediately. But that is a good benchmark, maybe, is if you're consistently making more money than you would doing other things.
Do you have an affinity for when let's say a guy in particular, like you own a guy at 1% and you remember that guy, because with the amount of lineups you're playing, like for me, and I think Jake and I have talked about this on the live stream a couple times, like there's a little bit of jazz to it, which I enjoy. And I feel like I have personal attachments to the guys I'm rooting for. But I feel like for you, maybe you're playing so many different slates, so many different sports across different sites. Like, do you feel that attachment, or is it not part of the game for you?
Sometimes. I guess there's certain players like last year. Everyone for some reason always says like Alex Smith can't have good games.
Yeah.
And then I had him like at 20%, and he was like 1% owned, and he just like went off for like a bajillion points. So that I kind of have an affinity maybe for those guys who people think don't have upside, because it's just like maybe it just hasn't happened yet, but that doesn't mean it. I think that probably has more to do with luck than anything.
Alexes have to support Alexes. There's a special place in hell for Alexes who don't support Alexes. That's what we all say. Jake, what else do you have? I feel like you probably have some more stuff that we should get.
Yeah, I got a couple more. So do you sweat, or I mean, probably not like night to night. Like, do you sweat like us mortals? Like, sweat your? Well, I know he sweats. Well, I think he sweats. I don't know. He might be a robot, but like, at what point would you sweat? Like your top 10 in the Millie Maker for NFL, or like, I'm just trying to gauge, or do you just not sweat at all?
It's something where I'm like checking my winnings throughout the night on my phone or whatever. But I find it to be kind of experience that is more bad than good. Mm-hmm. So I prefer just going out and having fun and not looking until the end of the night. But I'm not a robot, unfortunately. I am human, so I'm kind of addicted to some extent to the feedback of the phone telling you your winnings at any given moment.
That's totally what a robot would say. I'm keen to this.
Jake, what else you got?
Yeah, how are you able to manage all your lineups across sports when they're like the sports are overlapping? Like, is there a science to it, or I don't know?
Yeah, it's all like about kind of managing your time throughout the day. Well, the two that I can think of that are relevant are like NHL and NBA, because their seasons overlap like directly. So what I would do is NHL, most of the information is available like 3 hours before lock. Yeah. So I just do everything then. Maybe I'd miss some of the edge, but NBA, like the information isn't like super relevant until like right before lock. So it's kind of like knowing the sport and when you're able to build lineups. One that hasn't been working out as well for me is WNBA and baseball, because WNBA, they release the starting lineups like 30 minutes before lock, and it like always locks at the same time as MLB. So I'm thinking about kind of like stopping playing WNBA just because I'm missing out on so much there.
Oh no, that's tough. They're losing their number one supporter. That's not good. Big WNBA.
I'll still play, but just maybe not the ones that start at like 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. Eastern.
WNBA missing a key opportunity. I haven't played WNBA yet, and I wanted to after NBA, but MLB is kind of all encompassing, especially for our schedules with the live streams and stuff. Like, you got to really be on the ball, and I don't want to lose money in MLB because of WNBA. No offense, ladies. Like, good. I'm sure there's a lot of WNBA players watching this video right now.
You want me to make us some WNBA projections, Chris?
It would be helpful for me. I don't know. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
What's the biggest lesson you've had, or actually have there been any lessons you've had now that you've kind of been on both sides? You've been a player, now you're running this media enterprise, and you've been doing it, I think, 4 or 5 months now. So I guess, have there been lessons that have been on the media side and you running this website that have kind of informed your DFS process, or is there not much crossover?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first of all, I found out the business angle of this is a lot harder than I expected. So I recommend everyone don't quit your job playing DFS. Stick to that. But uh, doing the site has kind of helped me like improve my techniques because I feel more responsible because for my information being good since I'm putting it out. So I've been kind of coming up with new things. Make sure everything is on point.
Is there anybody who has been a DFS player sort of similar to you who's made the crossover in a way where you were like, I want to do what that guy's doing? Because I know some of the guys have had sites, but I don't know that any of them have had staying power, at least that I'm aware of. But was there anyone like that for you? You found inspirational to kind of take the jump into doing a media brand as well?
Well, the closest I can think of is Sahil Sid, who kind of was the face of RotoQL. I don't really know how much involvement he had in the company other than that, so it's hard for me to gauge. I feel like I'm a little bit of a trailblazer in the fact that I'm putting out my own info that you can use against me. So yeah, I guess kind of venturing into uncharted territory doing that.
Has there been anyone who's beaten you who was like, by the way, I'm a premium member, suck it, or something in that respect? Has it come up at all yet?
Well, I know that there's some of the top 10 players that are subscribers, so I don't know how much they use the site, but that definitely come back to it.
It's interesting. I would assume, I guess, yeah, that would make sense that players who are kind of in your stratosphere would want to know what you're thinking. So that might just be a thing, like, because you can't find that about the other 9 players, but they can actually find your thoughts and articles every day and stuff. So that's interesting.
They can do that for $49.99, all access premium membership at Awesemo.com.
True. Cheaper if you buy a year long too.
That's also
like
true.
pennies. Josh, any lingering questions you want to hit before we start to wrap up?
Nothing that he's probably going to answer on a video.
I have one.
Okay,
I think it was me and Josh that were we were talking about this a couple days ago. Either it was on the strategy video or not, and I just and I don't know. It might be different for different slates, but are you do you ever exclude players from your player pool, or is this a thing that? Yeah, I know Josh doesn't. I do.
This is my guess. I'm hoping I'm right.
It's not a feature I use a lot. There's some players I don't like their roster. One is Tiger Woods because I feel like the public opinion of him is always so much higher than his actual skill level. But usually I'll just let my projections do the work there, and then kind of look at the ownership. If a guy I feel like is too high owned or sack, then they'll usually be filtered out of my the lineups that I'm entering based on that.
Cool.
Are you ever forcing guys that you don't like in just because you feel like, I don't know. For me, sometimes I've had situations where I talk shit about a guy on a live stream and I know for a fact because I did it so authoritatively that there's a decent chance he does well. And that's just how the universe works. I feel like it's always the inverse of the outcome. So do you ever do that where you have a guy you're like, oh, David Hess sucks, but let me get him in there because he might be good.
All right, I might blow some minds here, but there is one time where I was playing against this recreational player, and every day he had Enes Kanter, and Enes Kanter was just going off. He's one of the most volatile players there is. At least these are back in his Thunder days. And I did some research, and I found that if I actually put him in my lineup, I would win more often because our lineups would have less other areas of differentiation, so I wouldn't have to win quite as much because that volatility actually was helping him overcome me if I had an advantage in projection. For more information about that, I wrote a little article about baseball head-to-heads that you can read and kind of understand the process there.
And it's Cancer. You're kryptonite. Who knew? It's a random one app. You and LeBron both. Anything else, guys, you want to hit?
I'm going to circle all the way back to poker. Were you using Poker Tracker or any of the other HUDs when they became popular?
Yeah, Poker Tracker was awesome. Hold'em Manager kind of was the premier one when I stopped playing, but they were a lot more sophisticated than what we have in DFS. So I'd like to kind of see that. Like they tell you how much you would win against certain players and stuff like that.
Man, can you imagine if
And-
that existed for DFS? Just like the way people
Yeah.
rostered everybody. Whew.
Yeah, basically it would tell you like how much someone won or lost while you're sitting at the table. So like if you did that in DFS, like you could look at a guy like I won't name any names, but you just know how they'd done that season because you're in every contest. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Man, that would be interesting.
Scary to track the tout boys on that one, I would presume.
It was
Yeah.
really crazy during the poker scene where you would just be like, oh, I've got X amount of hands on this person. I know how often they're going to raise. I know how often they're going to check raise. I know how often they're going to do literally everything. It just became this gargantuan database of everything that you've seen at the table forever. It was, when it started coming out, it was wild. I remember trying to get all the people's like to download the best set of rules for like classification, so you would get the right like icon next to somebody if they were a fish or a rock or whatever. That was like the coolest thing in the world to me. I just wish I had a
I feel
better
like-
computer at the time.
That could be like the next frontier in DFS because like what if you knew how often someone like stacked their team in like a 3-man or something, and then like maybe you like how often they have the chalk stack. Like Sahil said he like played the Rockies every time they're on the slate at home. So it's like having that information could be like informative to like coming up with a strategy to beat someone.
Yeah, if you're gonna play somebody in like a head-to-head or a 3-man or something like that, I would imagine that sort of information would be incredibly valuable.
I guess you mentioned one thing about the next frontier of DFS. Where do you see the industry going? I feel like this is a good one to kind of close out on. You've been a part of it on both sides. Now you're running a website, which I would hope now we're all working here, going to grow in the next few years and going to be a key part of people's DFS world. Where do you see the industry going? I mean, the sports betting stuff is big. There's been a ton of change within just the last few years and ebbs and flows of the industry. Where do you see it all going in the next, let's say, 5 years?
I kind of had pictured it taking the same life cycle as poker, where information became more available, and then the edge kind of was getting smaller and smaller, and the sites kind of lowered the site fees in response to that, trying to get people to play more volume. So that's kind of the path it was on, but this new sports betting Supreme Court decision is just going to change everything. So I see a lot of these companies not making DFS their priority. And I'm not really sure if that will be helpful or hurtful to DFS players. We'll have to wait and see.
And it's your job to be an advocate for it now. You have to be like a lobbyist for the industry.
That's not what I signed up for. What the hell?
Are you anticipating a future rake drop?
I think that it's important to the sites that the games are winnable. So I think they're going to adjust the rake to a level where that's possible. So I definitely could see it. It might come in the form of like rewards, like poker. We'll have to wait and see. I can't really anticipate what they're talking about behind the scenes.
Sure.
Well, I'm sure as soon as the world knows, we'll have it on Awesemo.com, which will be the place that you should all be going for DFS news and for stuff like this. We're going to try to do these every now and then just to kind of consolidate instead of little bits and pieces. In the future ones, though, we'll try to go back to get user questions in. So if you have stuff, tweet me at Chris Spags, email or support email. I don't know. We'll make an email on the site or something where people can email kind of ongoing questions. But yeah, I assume if people are seeing this, you're going to be a premium member. So we don't need to plug that. But if you are a premium member, thank you for watching. Any parting words, guys? And Alex, you got the first shot, but anybody else?
Yeah, thank you guys for watching our roundtable here, and yeah, thanks for supporting the site.
Josh, Jake?
Just thanks, everybody. I say thanks to you guys all the time, so I don't have too much extra to say.
Yeah, so do I. So very informative, Alex. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you guys for thanks, Alex. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you, Josh and Jake, for joining me on this journey. And we will see you guys again soon with another roundtable whenever the world decides we need to do it. So see you guys soon.
Later, everybody.